Chris, great to meet you. Thanks for doing this. I know you're not a big fan of doing podcasts, so appreciate you taking the time.
I'm doing less and less podcasts, and as I was saying to you before, this one or maybe the next one, I don't know. I'm doing less and less. This might be the last, but I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad we have a great mutual friend, Andy Scheckman, who is a wonderful human being, and so I'm stoked to talk to you. And thanks for having me.
This when people ask me to come on their shows, I struggle, man. I struggle to be on the other side of it, and so I get like if you're a writer, maybe you don't love to do like these types of conversations. I'm a terrible writer, so this is all I got. This is what I have to run with as being the host.
Well, I have a blog that I write on Substack, and it's easier for me to kind of organize. Like the nice thing is, like when the muse hits me, which is every couple days, once a week, where I really feel like, all right, I have some shit to say about something. I can put it down on there, or I can start drafting something on a Monday that I can publish on a Wednesday. Because the one thing that I don't want to do that I've never done, and I was doing my own podcast for years, but even now on the blog, is I don't want to force myself to put things up when I don't have anything to say. I hate that. I think it's disingenuous. I want to be able, and that's really, it's for my readers, but it's for me too. I want to be able to look back things that I post about and know, okay, that's my opinion about that. I think it was Mark Twain who said, like, you don't need a good memory if you just tell the truth all the time. And so the truth is sometimes I don't have anything to say. And a lot of times I have friends of mine that people who I really love reading, like Lynn Alden or Krista Muth, people who I really respect, like the people who over 10 years, I say, all right, these are the people that I know, at least as far as I'm concerned, have won my trust and have credibility and gravitas with me when they're talking about markets and the economy. And they're kind enough to contribute to my site also too. So a lot of days, if I don't have something to say, I'll go through some of the things that they've sent me and read through them. Sometimes they wind up being out of date, so I won't post them. But sometimes it's as simple as syndicating like Lynn Alden's newsletter, which I did a couple days ago with her kind permission. But I read it. I was like, this is great. And then a lot of times too, I have people that contribute, like, Peter Schiff gives me access to the things that he writes. I have some great, Mises Institute, a lot of these think tanks that publish under Creative Commons licenses. I can go in, and these are the sources that I read on the daily. So if there's something that I see that I really like, I can curate those things and move them over to my subscribers, which is really nice. But the point is, try not to talk if I don't have anything to say. I'd much rather be listening in those instances. And, when I do these video podcasts, sometimes, if I'm not prompted with great questions or I just feel apathetic, I don't really have much to say, but I'm sure we'll be fine today.
Oh, the pressure's on
Seeing
me.
as how my introduction there was about 12 minutes,
I'm curious, man. I mean, you've built an amazing Substack, a large audience. So, when you say, we wait for something to kind of to move you before you start discussing it, and you think about it for a few days before putting it to paper or publishing it. Does the running and the jiu-jitsu and all that, does that help you think through? Because I'm a runner myself, and I think a lot about like the conversations I'm going to having with you now. It helps me think through how I'm going to structure things.
Yeah, it does help a lot. I mean, the running more so than jujitsu, because jujitsu you have to be present to some degree, other you're going to get strangled. Um, but the running is very different in the sense that it does. I've been running for 20 years. It's always given me, great peace and allowed me to organize my thoughts. And like David Goggins talks about, keep the garage of your thoughts clean. So when you need something, you know where it is. And running for me is a great time to do that. And it does allow me to focus in on not just like tasks that I need to do, like, all right, hey, I got to go out and buy a fucking coffee table. Okay. Like that's something I have to do. But like it lets me organize my thoughts with regard to ideas that I might have, the world of finance, politics, all the things that I comment on. And so it is the case that sometimes, I get home and I immediately just start putting things down. I love to run, love it.
How far do you go?
All depends. Usually my shorter runs nowadays, I think a short run is, 5 is like kind of the least I'll do when I go out. And I stay usually between like 5 and 11, depending on the day. I'm toying with the idea of training to, which is this isn't going to happen. This would be the pinnacle of my running career as a human being. But I have this sick thought in the back of my head of trying to qualify for Boston, which really would be immensely difficult for me because of the pace required and the distance. And the longest I've ever run, I think, is 18 miles, and the pace that I run at is, if I redline it during a race, I can get down into the sevens, but I've never tried to do that like over that kind of distance.
That's amazing, man. I mean, I would do anything to be able to run a 7 minute mile. I mean, I'm 47 and never. I ran cross country when I was in high school, and I finished last in every race. Like I'm just slow. And
Well, that's okay.
no, yeah, yeah. I just, but 42, man, you're running 7 minute miles. I mean, even at 30, it's 7 minute.
Well, let's just qualify that. I'm not running 7 minute miles because if I'm racing, then I can, it's if it's a race. If I'm running like a 5 mile race, I can get into like the low sevens, high sixes for the race. But I mean, then I'm done. I'm not running 10 miles at 7 minutes. There's just no way, and I'm definitely not running a marathon at 7 minute miles.
Is it an
That would
everyday?
be redlining it.
Is it every day for you?
Yeah, 5, 6 days a week. And when I'm not running, I'm walking. I walk 7 days a week. So I take all my phone calls while I'm walking. I have my morning coffee while I'm walking. I walk everywhere. I'm in the city, and so I don't bike anywhere. I don't take the subway. It doesn't matter if it's 3, 4 miles across town. I walk. I have therapy in South Philly. That's 2 miles away. I walk down there twice a week. Um, and that's it. The steps just rack up, and yeah, I like to burn calories so that I can be a slob when I get home and I want to eat, and not feel awful about it.
What is your eating like? I mean, I wasn't planning to talk to you about your eating and running, but this is fascinating to me. So what is your eating like?
Right now, I'm eating like 100% plant based. I ate vegan for years, some years back, and then I stopped, and now I'm back on a pretty clean, raw, like whole foods vegan diet. And for me, it works. A lot of people I know give me shit about it, especially being a conservative. A lot of people on the right, oh, where do you get your protein? Like, well, you don't eat meat. Try the carnivore diet, try this, try that, whatever. Hey, you know what? Did my fucking research. I know what my body feels like when I fucking eat a filet mignon. I know what my body feels like when I eat garbanzo beans. I know what the difference is, and I function better when I'm eating like a mostly vegan, plant-based diet. And I've endured tons of shit for it at jiu-jitsu all over the place when people bring it up. But the only thing I give a fuck about is living and not getting heart disease and performing well. And if I eat a clean plant-based diet, I feel fucking better. I run faster. I roll better. I can roll more rounds faster, And so, you know, it's okay when the guy giving you shit is getting choked underneath you, it's like, all right, show you what the carrots can do, like,
Yeah,
but I know I'll get copious shit for that, and that's fine, but again, only thing that matters to me is performance. That's really it. At this point at 42, like I'm not trying to I'm trying to give myself the best chance to perform better and to live longer. And that's, it's part of the reason I stopped drinking alcohol at the end of last year as well. So,
yeah. I was going to ask you next. I saw you write about that, and it's been today's 73 days.
yeah, yeah.
So tomorrow when this
Mm-hmm.
comes out, I'll be 74.
Yeah.
So what prompted all that? I mean, you gambling.
Yeah.
What a story you got, right? I mean, gambling.
Well, so far it's yeah, I just, gambling and drinking were two things I had done for 20 years. And neither of them work for me anymore. And that's pretty much the long and short of it. I wasn't a blackout, insane like drinker these last 10 years. Of course, when I was in college, everybody drank a lot in college, but really the last like 10 years, I was, very under control with my drinking. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I was drinking, 3 to 4 beers, 3 to 4 days a week, and that just fucking adds up. And it just is something I don't need to be doing. And, as I would be doing it, I knew I was paying for. The first thing I did was I got educated, right? So I read a lot about, alcohol's effects on the body. I, read a lot. For me, mental health and anxiety was a big part of it too, because for a long time I was drinking to alleviate anxiety and didn't understand that really when you stop the alcohol for a prolonged period of time and allow your body to recalibrate without the alcohol in your system, you actually do achieve a calm and a peace that you've been looking for. There's a saying in recovery that, like, people drink because they want to feel like a normal person feels sober. And every time, and I had taken prolonged breaks from alcohol multiple times um, over the last few years. And what I noticed was every time I would hit somewhere between 10 and 14 days, I would just feel this like immense calm. And so as I started to understand that and began to really, I had a therapist tell me, look, you have this anxiety, you have this panic disorder, all this stuff. The hangover from the alcohol is contributing to that chemical imbalance. It's making that worse, which I don't know why it took me 18 years of drinking to understand that. Nobody had told me. So when my therapist told me that a couple of years ago, I was like, that's fucking interesting. Then I noticed. So after I knew, I kind of started to notice the first few times I took prolonged breaks from alcohol that, hey, like my body felt like it was downshifting after 10 days or 14 days, and I like that. And I was getting to these places of like really feeling insulated and calm in a way that I hadn't in 20 years. And so really my mind was made up months ago about it, or years ago probably. It was just having the discipline to follow through. And then a lot of it too is muscle memory. A lot of it is navigating the social situations. And so you kind of have to learn that, hey, like I was literally just at a bar before I came here with a friend of mine, and I was drinking chamomile tea. And it was great. We sat there, we, had our conversation, had a nice little lunch, whatever. You learn how to navigate social situations, and in my case learn that I was talking to people and doing things that otherwise I normally wouldn't be interested in doing. And so when you take the alcohol out of the equation, you start learning about yourself, and that's kind of what I started to do. And that becomes a flywheel that starts to pick up speed the longer that you remain sober, and it just kind of helps you out and makes you a little bit stronger. And so I did a fair amount of research. Like I said, I've been in therapy for a long time, probably 10 years off and on. And so I've got a lot of tools from that and educated myself through that. Um, and yeah, I mean, I have some great friends that are really like tightly wound into the recovery community. And so they were kind of able to open the door to more, more tools, more education, more things to learn from that I didn't know about. And really without any stigma or anything like that. That was never an issue because I had been doing cognitive behavioral therapy for a while. So I didn't give a fuck if anybody like cared I was in therapy. Like there was never a stigma for me after the first 6 months that I realized, okay, this is helping me. So I don't give a fuck what anybody thinks. Um, but yeah, it's been great. And, people in recovery communities whether it's alcohol, whether it's gambling, whether it's narcotics, whether it's sex addiction, whatever. There is like an incredible tie that binds people in recovery communities and people that go to 12-step meetings. And it's unlike anything I've ever seen before because it just kind of like it usurps, your sex, your age, your religion, your personal, politics. It's bigger than all of that. And it's like an incredible network of like-minded people that really has been one of the coolest resources and one of the coolest things that happened since I started, kind of probing around in that space. Um, when I started writing about the fact that okay, I got 50 days sober, I got 70 days sober, whatever. The amount of people that fucking reached out to me, I mean, like dozens and dozens and dozens of people. I stopped 3 years ago. I stopped, one guy today. I got 37 days. Like it's awesome, and that becomes like a really good support system as well. So it just kind of builds on itself.
Well, and then also,
And the other thing too, just sorry,
no,
how dare you try to ask a question? How dare you try to follow up while I monopolize the conversation? No, like last thing though,
this is about you, man,
hand to
not me.
God, hand to God, at 42 years old, it impedes my performance. I feel like dog shit. In addition to the shame and the guilt and the anxiety and all the dark side feelings that come with it, it impedes my performance. My jujitsu suffers, my running suffers, my chess. I like to play chess. My chess suffers if I'm not focused. So there's it just doesn't do anything for me anymore. If it does things for other people, I'm happy for them, but it's not for me anymore.
You play chess too. Do you ever go to Washington Park, Washington Square?
No, when I'm in New York, I play in Union Square. So shout out to O and Pagote and Alfred. Those are a couple of the chess guys in Union Square.
So you go over there and play.
I do, yeah.
That's amazing. How often do you do that?
I lose mostly whenever I'm in the area. And when I'm in Philly, I play my buddy Mr. Shannon in Rittenhouse Square.
So when you go over to Union Square in New York, like how long will you spend over there?
I usually play like one or two games. I don't have the like. I will put all my focus into because I know I'm playing somebody better than me. So I'll put all my focus into the first game. And what I've learned over the last, 6 or 7 years since I started playing chess is I really only have the focus enough for like one damn good game. Unless I'm playing like Blitz online or something. If I'm playing, somebody who's very top tier, like nearing, a 2000 rating or wherever most of these guys are, I need to focus 100% on that first game. And my goal most of the time is just get to the end game and not blow the game, not blunder, because I'm not generally going to win. So um, after that first game, I'm generally on tilt after that. So, I just kind of swear off playing more than one or two games.
Yeah, that's amazing. I played a lot of chess when I was a kid. I wasn't good, but my only time ever going to New York City, we went to Washington Square Park because Searching for Bobby Fischer was one of as a child. I still love that movie. I'm almost 47 years old, and that movie's still fantastic to me.
Yeah, I've never seen it actually, so I got to put it on the list.
Oh, it's great. I mean, I don't know if you know the premise. But they were looking for the next Bobby Fischer and Josh Waitzkin. It was based on a true story, and the kid was about him, and he would go to Washington Square Park and play with
Okay.
the homeless or whoever was there. And Lawrence Fishburne was the homeless guy, and I mean, the movie's from 1990, 1991. But when we were in a cab, this is back in 2002. And the guy's like, "That's Washington Square Park." And I said to my buddies, I go, we're half shit faced. I go, we got to come back here tomorrow. I got to see this park during the day. And it was just amazing to me. Like people were just playing all day, playing board games outside.
It's great. That's another thing that connects people. I was in Rome this summer and, just looked up chess cafes in Rome. And there's this, I forget what it was called, but there's one cafe specifically in Rome on this little back, alley kind of tucked in between a couple different buildings where, it wasn't the nicest cafe in the world, but there you go. There's a couple groups of people outside and like show up. I say, hey, for your purposes, I'm a novice and I'm a tourist, and my Italian sucks. But it's like, come down, play a game. Got to play a couple games, and then sit around and watch the guys play their games, and so it's cool. It links people up.
When you travel like that, I mean, are you also, you know, scanning just to see like on the ground, like boots on the ground, like what are things like economically? How are things like the local region or
Not really. I mean, I don't go places with the purpose of doing due diligence. So mostly it's just to eat. Um, but you notice what you notice. I mean, you're there, and so if you go to a bar and the bartender tells you, hey, we're doing 50% less than we were doing last year, hey, you put that in the back of your head.
how was it? How was Italy?
It was beautiful. I loved it. It was great. It was my first time in Rome. I've been to Florence before. Um, but yeah, Rome was beautiful. The train ride too, the riding the Freccia Rossa, which is the Red Arrow train, doing 250 miles an hour from Venice to Rome was pretty cool. I enjoyed the train ride. I love trains, but yeah, Rome was beautiful. I ate great food every night. The last night I ate at this cafe called Harry's Bar, which I would recommend. It was fantastic. Met some wonderful people, did some shopping, just kicked it, had a good time.
God, man, you know what?
Saw the Trevi Fountain, the Spanish Steps, all that bullshit. I had some great runs in Rome. It was like 100. It was between 100 and 105 the whole week that I was in Rome, and so it was brutal, brutal runs. But really, I had some good ones. Usually, when I travel, that's what I do. I'll go somewhere, I'll check in, and I immediately go run, and that's how I learn the city. Because if I'm gonna, get to know a city for the first time, I'll go run 5, 6 miles, figure out a loop, and then like, okay, now I got places I know that I want to go after I'm showered and ready to enjoy the day.
Is it when you do that, when you go abroad like that, it's vacation or is it somewhat work related in terms of
No, this summer was just vacation.
that's amazing, man. Where else did you go?
I just, went around Europe. I went to Paris and Amsterdam.
How was
And I
that?
visited
How was
what,
Paris
Amsterdam?
Paris and Amsterdam?
Paris was beautiful. It was my first time in Paris. More great food, more good runs. I had some great runs in Paris. I had like a 7, 8 mile loop that I was doing that I really enjoyed. It was hot uh, still in Paris. Amsterdam was cold and rainy. Amsterdam was cool. I didn't need a lot of time in Amsterdam. I didn't feel like it was the kind of place you'd go for like a week or two. But you know, went there, ran through Vondel Park a couple of times, which is the park downtown in Amsterdam. Beautiful place to the park. Vondel Park is very cool. Beautiful place to run, and they have a loop, which I think it's like 1.5 miles, the loop, which is enough. It's got a couple little bodies of water, and people are walking their dogs, and really, really cool little park to run through. So I did laps in that park. It was nice, Amsterdam. Food sucked in Amsterdam, but food was better in Paris and Rome.
Yeah, it's one of the beauties of being a runner, and I don't know about you, but people will say to me, your knees are going to be shot. And I'm like, bitch, you were saying that when I was 25. Here I am 47
Yeah.
and I'm still
Well, it's very easy for people to come up with bullshit reasons why you shouldn't do something that they don't want to do or can't do. And it's also like, I've heard every like excuse in the book. And I'm not some motivational fucking speaker, you know what I mean? I'm not David Goggins, but like just being around, you know, training, running, being around people that are athletes, you just always, oh, I got a bad back. I got this, I got that. I can't do it. It's too hot. It's too cold. It's raining. It's not raining. It's this, it's that. I got a torn ACL. I got this, I got that. Obviously, you don't want to run on a torn ACL, but like, you know, for me, like that kind of stuff, if I can get out of bed and I can walk, I'm going for a run. Yesterday, I couldn't. Yesterday, I had fucking like really bad turf toe. which is like a recurring thing I get in my toe. And I was like hobbling around and all my foot was all inflamed and shit. So I couldn't run. And that was like, I physically couldn't do it. Other than that, I have to stay active. It's part of my lifestyle.
Well, and the beauty when you travel is you just take your shoes. You don't need to bring anything
That's
else
all
with
you
you,
need.
and a bottle
Yep.
and a water bottle.
That's all you need. You don't even need that. Just your shoes, your shorts, one t-shirt. If it's over, if it's over 30, I'm fine. I'm fine with a long sleeve t-shirt and, a pair of shorts. That's it.
And the scenery, and like you said, you get to assess an area. Man, one of my favorite things to do is to come back to Ohio in October and just hit the park systems. It's the best.
Yeah, I've run some really cool places. I ran there was a park in Munich that I ran called like it's called like the English Park or something like that, but also another like beautiful, huge, enormous park that I ran through. And of course, there is a trail where I used to live out in like semi-rural Pennsylvania called the Perkiomen Trail, which I loved running, which runs like from Philly all the way up to this reservoir called Green Lane. I think the whole trail's like 40 miles or something, but would run a little stretch of that I loved. So yeah, running's fantastic, man.
Do you last question about running? Do you do you ever run out in Arizona? You ever hit the desert at all?
No, I've never been. I don't think I've ever been to Arizona other than for a layover in Phoenix.
Yeah, you'd like the trails here. I mean, I'm not used to the trails where you're at because there's so much roots in the ground versus the rock.
Yeah,
Running in the woods, like in the Midwest, it's. I mean, I'm just not used to it, so it's a little more challenging.
yeah. Well, higher elevations, hotter temperatures. Those are the kind of things now. Like as I'm running, when it's like 30 and rainy, and I'm having these like great runs, and I feel like a speed demon. I always have to remind myself like there's always that day every year, every fucking year, there's always that day where I go out and it's like 65 and there's some humidity and it's like I just can't get my legs working and like I'm looking at my pace and I'm like a minute slower than I was all winter. That happens every year and every year I'm like, is there something wrong with me? Like, am I okay? Do I need to go to a doctor? And it's just like, no, it's just the hot weather. So like the elevation and the weather really do make a profound difference.
So, along with you giving up the alcohol, you're not gambling anymore.
Correct. Yeah.
How? So, what was the gambling like before?
It just was like another thing that didn't need to happen.
Was it a
Um,
problem
you
in your
know,
eyes?
yeah, at one point it was, yeah, for sure. And I started trying to remedy it years ago, and took some measures to do that. But really,
Chris, let me
like,
let me interrupt you. What in your mind was a
yeah,
problem? What were you doing? Because I come from a family of gamblers, and as a child, my father loves betting on sports. I remember as a
yeah.
kid going into this guy's house. It was Thursday night football. I don't know. I was probably like 9 or 10 years old, and the guy had like four phones on his kitchen table. And I'm like, Dad, he's got four phones on the table. Like, so what was in your mind? What were you doing that was a problem?
It was just, well, years ago when I started, it was, I think I made my first sports bet when I was like 18. And so, you're talking about 20 years but then like back then there was no, you weren't on the internet. Like they had just maybe like one or two little things. You had to have a bookie, back then. And when you bet with a bookie, you're betting on credit. And when you're a gambler and you're betting on credit, it's very easy to run up a tab. And so, there were just multiple times where, I just got in over my head and, the dollar amounts were small, but it doesn't matter because it was, relative to what I was able to put up wasn't, it wasn't enough. And it just it got to a point where it was just creating undue stress and like the alcohol on more than one occasion I knew that it wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. I knew that it wasn't for me and it wasn't serving me well. And like when I would trade, for instance, like stocks or options or whatever, even if I had a thesis right, I'd figure out some way to fuck up the trade. And like, you do that a bunch of times and you look at that and you're like, that starts to become like a huge fucking bummer. It's like, wow, like I can call it, I can write it the right way, but I don't have the discipline to trade properly. And it never got to like a point where I was like destitute, but I let it like fester and let it go on for longer than it should. And for me, like if I, go and watch a game or something and I lose like a sports bet or something, like, I think about like, okay, like maybe I should go and I should put another one in, or maybe I should, double down or stuff like that. And that kind of thought process is just not, it's not conducive to anything other than destroying your capital, which in turn generates stress like the alcohol. And so it just got to a point where I just said I have to stop. Like I can't, I didn't feel like a complete loss of control, but I felt like I was walking a very narrow corridor that I wasn't interested in. People say, you don't have to take the elevator all the way down to the bottom. Like I don't think I ever took the elevator all the way down to the bottom, but it just generated stress that I didn't need. And I started when I was in college betting on sports because I wasn't like huge into sports when I was younger. And so going to college and linking up with a bunch of people in a new area, because I was from New Jersey, linking up with a bunch of people in outside of Philadelphia and not knowing anything about the Philadelphia sports teams, it became a way for me to give a shit about, whether or not fucking, you know, uh, what the hell is his name? I can't remember this pitcher, but like, Gavin Floyd, that's the very obscure Phillies pitcher. It made it, uh, it made it relevant to me whether or not Gavin Floyd had a good game pitching for the Philadelphia Phillies, or if Bobby Abreu hit a home run, or and it was a way to kind of link up with people and assimilate myself. Um, and so that was part of the reason that I started to bet sports in college, because I was surrounded by people who were rooting for sports teams like their lives depended on it. And I was like, man, I couldn't be more indifferent really about what happens in this game. So like, what's my problem? And then, put $50 on a game and the Phillies win. And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I see what all the excitement's about. So, that like the alcohol, arresting the gambling, all it does is lead you down a path where you start to reacquaint yourself with yourself, which is the guy before I had that idea. Oh, whatever, and I'll bet on this game so I can assimilate myself with these people. And if you roll the tape all the way back, it turns out maybe I just don't have that much in common with these people, like maybe they're not destined to be my friends to begin with. Maybe I don't need to fucking, be liked by everybody. They say, people stop being pleased when you stop being a people pleaser. And maybe it's like that. So, for years, and we were just talking about being in Philly, which is very close to Atlantic City. And so, that was the thing in college. Everybody go down to Atlantic City, you go down, you have a blowout, you drink your ass off, you go, play blackjack all night, whatever. And like that's was great for 20 years. And but at some point that party just has to stop. Like my body says no. The stress that it generates is just complete. I just don't have room for it. I don't have room for it in my life anymore. I was watching the Chiefs game the other day where the guy fucking ran in for the safety, and that like backdoor covered the spread for the Houston Texans. And I was just thinking about moments like that times a million of them that happen, that like dictated my mood for what would have otherwise been a normal night hanging out with friends. If that worked for me, I would have been the happiest guy in the world. And if it worked against me, I would have been, pissed off for the rest of the night. And I'm just not interested in allowing that to dictate my mood or to generate stress for me anymore. And I just like the alcohol, I don't have space for it. And so it is a tall task to abstain from things that you've done for a very long time. And I'm just leaning heavily on the tools that I have and being proactive in trying to put the work in on myself. Anybody that's been to any kind of 12-step room knows they say it works if you work it, which is really it. It's like a relationship with your wife. It's going to be great if you put into it. You're going to get out of it what you put into it. And it's the same with trying to kick long-standing habits. It's called doing the work for a reason. And so every day I'm doing things. I'm listening to, recovery podcasts, or I'm going to group therapy, or I'm reading, I'm reaching out to people that I know now that have asked, or that have extended themselves to me to just, make sure that for a half hour a day or an hour a day, if I'm not going to therapy that day, that I'm getting that mindset in my head. And that's it. I'm going to get out of it what I put into it. And I'm cognizant of that now. And, with the grace of God, I've got 73 days, which is fantastic. I'm very proud of myself. And I can see on the other side of, panic, anxiety, shame, guilt, fear, paranoia, on the other side of that aisle, there's all kinds of good stuff. There's love, there's open-mindedness, there's being proud of yourself, there's integrity. And so I have gotten a little taste of that in a way that I haven't had in decades. And I'm very interested in continuing down that path.
Well, and then you also said, in relation to that, one of the other things you gave up, and you mentioned your trading, right? Because you're day trading, so
Yeah.
you stopped doing that then too,
Yes. Yeah.
because same kind of feeling.
Um,
I've never
you
been a
know,
day trader. I think you might be the.
not really, but you know, I don't have the discipline for it, So like for me, you know, uh, being in being in fixed income, or, having exposure to the market, but having it managed, through just like a recurring investment, program, or through a manager, uh, those serve me much better because I don't have the time to sit there and fuck around and watch everything tick by tick anymore. It just doesn't do anything for me. It creates stress. It's a trigger. It's and I don't have the time. I'd rather be out for a run than worrying about what the stock market's doing at that particular moment. I can get the fucking news at the end of the day. I catch up on the news 2, 3 times a day for sure. But like, do I need to know what Nvidia is doing on a tick by tick basis? No. And unless you're just like speculating purely or day trading, like those are really the only people that need to know what's going on a second by second basis. So I'm lucky that I think over the last 20 years, I've learned enough about the world of finance to be able to position myself in a way, know that I've got exposure where I want it, and then kind of set it and forget it. And that's just the way it's been going, and I've felt great since then.
And this has carried over this transition over the last 73 days. Is professionally, it's come with you as well
What do you mean?
in terms of, so you're not day trading anymore.
Correct.
How are you approaching your work differently, based on what you're writing about, or?
Not really. I wrote a note to my subscribers just about all of this, and um, I'm really not. The main difference is I just feel a clarity and a peace and a lot of space in my head that I didn't otherwise have. If I was, say I was dedicating 40% of my brain to what I was writing on my blog. I'm still dedicating that 40% of my brain, but the other 60% isn't full of bullshit and nonsense and like, constantly checking like, oh, what's this stock doing here, whatever. I get news, and news is everywhere now in this day and age. It's like betting on sports. It's everywhere. And you can bet on every pitch in a baseball game now, which is just frightening. It really is. It's frightening because
Are you serious? Can you
yeah,
really do that?
yeah, you can bet live on like DraftKings or FanDuel. I mean, you can bet each play. Is it going to be a run? Is it going to be a pass? And so it's very simple. It's very similar rather to day trading. which is like, yeah, look, I can buy the stock at 12 o'clock. I can sell it at 12:10. You know, you're getting like a second by second, minute by minute. And like, man, if people can do that and they can crush it and it serves them, that's fine. But for me, it's nice to just have the extra space in my head. It's nice to be calm. It's nice to feel a sense of peace and not worry about it.
I think so many people, and to me, it's all the overview of it is it's the theme is the same. I was talking to a friend of mine about kind of where we're at, like with the government and the new administration. The people are coming in thinking like Trump is Messiah and he's going to fix everything and make America great again for everybody, and we don't have to do anything. I've said, and I've been critical of him. I mean, much more critical on the other side than I was of Trump, but it all starts from within. Like, you have to fix your own shit. So it doesn't matter. I can't control what people are going to do at the top level. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But what I can control is in my own little local sphere, right? Of where, like, I used to weigh 280 pounds. I'm only 5'5". Just give you an
Right.
idea. And I did not do any crazy diets. I mean, I'm mostly carnivore now, but I didn't take pills. I had a problem. I'm really good at eating. You're good at gambling. You're good at drinking. People like to crochet.
I
I'm
wasn't
really
good at it. If I was good at it, I wouldn't be stopping, you know?
right. Yeah, touche. But you have to work within you have to fix yourself.
Right.
But people want the government to do everything for them. Like,
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, and there's nothing that the government can do, for anybody if they're not ready to make the change. And that's it. And that's another thing you just hear like, in recovery and group therapy a lot, people saying like, well, I just I started going to meetings and I just wasn't ready to stop drinking. And so I went back out and I drank again for another 6 months until I was ready to come back in again. And then I was ready, and you hear that over and over and over again. And that's it. You have to be ready. You have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. And you have to, and I tell you, man, hand to God, I'm not bullshitting you. In November because again, these are both things that I have worked on for years and I've made great strides on them for years. I'm in a much better place than I was 5 years ago, um, but I just wasn't completely abstaining, and so it was like tipping over a vending machine. I had to work my way up to it. I had other mental health problems and issues and trauma that I wanted to work through also first, so I got a lot of that stuff out of the way, and in November of last year, I just said like I'm ready. Like I'm ready. I'm ready to not drink. I'm ready to not go back to a casino. I'm ready to not bet on a sports game. I called it in my letter a spiritual shift, and it really like it did kind of feel like that. I mean, that's a term that a lot of people in recovery communities toss around that sounds like it doesn't make sense until it happens, and then it sounds like it makes a little bit more sense. But I don't know. I felt an immense calm, and I th- felt like this is it. Like it's now or never. And so, you know, got 73 days, which who knows what'll happen tomorrow, but I'm just focused on today. I'm focused on day 73.
well, so personally, it sounds to me you're on the right track. Substack is going well, right? I'm assuming here. I mean, it continues to do well for you. Where do you think
Oh yeah, I have my subscribers are awesome.
yeah, I mean, where do you think we're at in terms of economically? I mean, you just wrote about what the United States needs to do in regards to taking a blueprint out of Canada's playbook. Uh,
Yeah.
you think it's possible, Chris,
What?
the United States to do something like that?
I think look, if you want to talk about the fiscal and economic where where the country is monetarily, fiscally, in the market, we're in this very interesting, unprecedented spot right now where, we blew this enormous bubble again over, coming out of COVID. The Fed put $6 trillion on its balance sheet. Um, we hit liquidity levels that we've never seen before. The money supply, we printed something like 40% of all the money we've ever had in like a year, which is just perverse when you think about it. And now you have positive real rates, if you believe the bullshit CPI number. But
Do
let's
you
just
do
say you
you
have
do you believe? I didn't mean to cut you off. But do you believe those numbers?
no, I don't, because they things like owner's equivalent rent and hedonic adjustments, and there used to be a thing called the Chapwood Index, I think, which really took a basket of items and measured them year over year. Magazine subscriptions, gallon of milk, this, that, and the other, medical insurance, some things that aren't included in the CPI figure. And they found pretty consistently that inflation was running closer to 10% annually every year than 3%. So, look, when the Fed's rigged number is 3%, there's a problem. Um, but with positive real rates now, ostensibly, or just higher interest rates on that enormous debt bubble that we have, and you see auto delinquencies rising, you see credit card delinquencies rising, you got a big bubble in commercial real estate that hasn't popped yet, still lingering from COVID. You have American households that are getting a little strapped for cash. You have a lot of private credit marks that are just air. You can read David Einhorn's book, Fooling Some of the People Some of the Time, or whatever it's called, about Allied Capital, but ostensibly just marking, you have a whole financial industry of people marking their investments where they don't belong because there's no market for them. And so, it's not like a stock where you can see where Apple traded yesterday. A lot of these, private credit investments, VC investments, people are just guessing, and nobody wants their balance sheet to look horrible when they produce numbers quarterly or whatever annually. And so they're just marking their books with the numbers that they'd like to see. Whereas if they actually had to liquidate their position and offload whatever it is they're holding, they couldn't get anything near that price. So there's air pockets there. There's just bonds are another one. The bank term funding program, now the Fed is saying like, okay, you just mark your bonds at par, even though they're not at par. It's like, all right, well, so you have all these like little accounting tricks that don't really change the fact that under the surface, like there's distress bubbling. And you can just see it in things like credit card delinquencies. Like you just watch a trend of credit card delinquencies, where it went in 2008 and like the way that it's moving now, you'll see that the trend is moving in the same direction. They're on their way up. And so, as delinquencies rise, eventually it starts at the low part of the totem pole, which is, credit cards, unsecured personal loans, those kind of things. And then eventually it works its way up to, not making the car payment. And then at the top of the totem pole is not making a house payment. And so I don't know where we are, but that's kind of the trajectory of things. And if we keep rates here, at 3 to 5%, all that is doing, positive real rates, all it does is just slowly, grinds the gears of the economy a little bit slower with every day that passes. And, rate hikes and rate cuts have like generally like an 18 to 24-month lag with how they hit the economy. And so, ostensibly, what you can argue is that the negative effects in the economy that we're feeling now are, the effects that began due to rate hikes 18 months ago or 24 months ago. So, with that in mind, there's still a very long runway for the economy here to endure, restrictive rates as we go forward. And I just think that no matter what we do now, even if we cut rates now, I think the time bomb, the positive real rate time bomb is already kind of making its way through the plumbing of the economy. It's just a question of when it blows up. And like we saw this thing with, we saw it with the yen carry trade a couple months ago. And when that blew up, markets kind of dove 3 to 5%, I think, over a day or two. We saw it with the DeepSeek AI thing just a couple of days ago, where DeepSeek came out, and then all of a sudden it was like, wow, the entire narrative we've been telling ourselves about AI, Nvidia, all these companies that are, using AI as a reason to command these insane, 50x PE, 60x PE valuations. Could that narrative all just be bullshit? And that's what people were asking when DeepSeek came out with their product, even though they, probably didn't cost them as little to make as they claimed. But the point is, the market didn't wait to fucking ask questions. Stocks were down, 3 or 4% that next day. And so there's a saying that stocks take the stairs up and the elevator down. And we'll see that at some point. There's a black swan swimming around out there somewhere, and something will set off a chain reaction of deleveraging and panic and fear and margin calls. And this thing will eventually, go lower. The only question is how much lower and how catastrophic does the issue become? When the Silicon Valley Bank thing happened, that looked pretty bad. And that set off like a pretty serious chain reaction. And that started not just because, the bank was investing in dog shit, VC early stage startups, but because they had put a bunch of treasuries on their balance sheet, and then the bond market pulled back. And so, they needed, all the treasuries that they were marking on their balance sheet came off whatever 15%, which is not, you don't buy treasuries with the scenario in your head that they're going to fall, the bonds are going to fall 10% or 15%. It's just, you just don't expect that to happen. And when that does, it creates financial stress. And they needed to go to the market and they needed to raise money for liquidity. And as soon as they said to the market, hey, we're selling some equity here, or doing a fire sale of assets, or whatever they were doing, I think it was like 2 days, and people had requested like $60 billion in redemptions and withdrawals. And so that's how quickly things can get out of line, from one day to the next. I remember it was in the afternoon that they said they were doing the fire sale of equity or assets or whatever it was. We were just talking about Manioc. I was in Manioc at the time. I remember where I was walking. I was on Levering. I think it's called Levering Street. Under the train tracks when I read that PR on my phone, and I saw, oh yeah, this thing's kind of getting hit here, or whatever. And by the next morning, it was a full scale fucking nightmare. And then First National and these other banks went, until the Fed came out and did what they weren't supposed to do according to Dodd-Frank, and bail the banks out and say, hey, all these banks can now sell these treasuries back to the Fed at par, which is insane. It's the Fed buying everything back at a 10% premium. It's a horrible investment. The bond market is saying bonds should be priced one way, and now the Fed's saying, no, 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 you're wrong. I mean, it's essentially, it's yield curve control. It's whatever you want to call it. It's a bailout. And so we're walking on very thin ice, and we have been for a while. And I would not be surprised, if it's tomorrow that we wake up and there's some fraud that hasn't been discovered that takes down part of the system, like Madoff did at one point, or there's, some big narrative and trend that turns out to be bunk, or, so one company, Nvidia misses earnings, or there's some kind of black swan that comes out, and that's going to be all it takes. And one of them will be bigger than the Fed. One of them will be big enough that it's not going to matter immediately what the Fed does, because it's going to trigger such a accelerated and panicked deleveraging, which is when 100,000 people all get margin calls in a row, and everybody's got to sell, and there's nobody, there's no buyers, and that drives down prices, and lower prices, brings the price of everybody's collateral down. And then people have to keep selling at the lower prices. I mean, you got yourself a real fucking shitburger of a problem, and it can happen quickly, and it could happen anywhere. It could be in the donut industry, like, just, it'll come from somewhere where we don't expect, maybe, Krispy Kreme comes out and says, remember Luckin Coffee, the fraudulent coffee company? Could be anywhere, but at some point there will be some issue that comes to light and triggers a large cascade of reactions to it. And the only question is, where is it and when's it going to happen? And if I knew that, maybe that would be one more bet I would place, but I don't know. At this point, maybe I wouldn't, just for my mental health.
Are you surprised that the system has held up as long as it has, especially after 2008 and then after COVID?
Yeah,
And
but we're in really unprecedented territory now, because essentially when the market crashes this next time, the Fed's going to have to choose between, a 40-50% drawdown in equity markets, which will essentially be a depression. It will be a deflationary depression type of scenario, or they're going to have to print in such perversely large numbers that it's going to uh, keep the fire under the inflation, uh, you know, under the inflation genie, and inflation is going to pick up. I mean, we're you know what the Fed is doing now is what they're telegraphing is like, okay, like maybe we'll accept higher inflation than 2%, and that's just another step higher on the staircase toward hyperinflation eventually. And right now we have the world's reserve currency, which has been our biggest asset. Your friend Andy Scheckman, exactly how this works. But without the dollar's reserve currency status, like, what do we have? And if that gets called into question, which a lot of people have been doing, especially since we weaponized the dollar against Russia after they went into Ukraine. Um, you know, if that starts to get called into question, then you might be on the verge of some serious shit. But so far it just looks like little cracks in the surface. But you know, there's a way to it's a narrow corridor to walk also, but there's a way to bring integrity back to the dollar and our economy, and cutting spending is a way to do it. Running the nation at a fiscal surplus would be a great start. And just showing that we can shift gears and get on our front foot as it relates to the national debt, as opposed to really what the Biden administration appeared to be doing was saying, look, we're driving this car doing 90. We don't have any brakes. We see the brick wall. There's nothing we can do. So we might as well hit the accelerator further and max this fucker out and do 140. And that's how bad the spending and the debt, accrual has gotten under the last administration. But really, it's been the last, 10, 15 years. You look at a chart of the national debt, we're going up on this thing, and bang. And then all of a sudden, things are going parabolic, like the money supply. So if we don't wrestle control back from some of these trends that have already been set in motion, I quote my friend Jim Chanos, who said to me once, where it's an unprecedented monetary experiment and it's going to yield unprecedented results, and that's about as much as I care to try to predict at this point, because, when it comes to timing, I've been wrong a lot. But as far as outlook, like, sure seems like sovereign debt crisis might be the next thing. I don't really know. It's going to be tough to navigate. We'll see what the geopolitical relationship that we're going to have with the BRICS nations is going to play a huge role. Um, yeah. So there's a lot of variables.
yeah, one thing I've learned is these people, they are, I've said this before, they're very creative, because again, I never thought the system would last this long, but it keeps limping. It's just when you think it's on the brink of going
Just
down.
band-aid, 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 kick the can, band-aid, kick the can, band-aid. Yeah. And nobody ever wants to pay the piper. And all that does is it just makes the check that much bigger when it comes due. And so, our politicians have such an aversion to discomfort, and they're so chicken shit on both sides of the aisle, and so dickless and so cowardly, because the only thing they're worried about is their prospects for reelection. And what it's done is it's conditioned them to only worry about reelection, which necessitates making your constituents happy by any means necessary, even if it's taking the quick fix that has long term consequences. And we have a nation of people who are coddled and who are used to a certain quality of life and a certain level of comfort. And the longer that pursues, the less discomfort it takes for people to completely freak. And so right now we've got, an entire nation full of economic and fiscal snowflakes that at the first sign of any type of, fucking Jeremy Siegel was on CNBC after the yen carry trade chaos and the market was down 3%, calling for an emergency 75 basis point cut. Jeremy Siegel, Wharton professor, wrote a bunch of books about why it's great that the stock market only goes up. 15 trillion days of the stock market going up, 3% from all time highs. It calls for an emergency rate cut because the stock market was down 3% in one day. That's where we are in terms of like being coddled. And he's not a fucking, he's not some hobbyist. Like he's a PhD that all he deals with is, economics in the world of finance. He's probably on some financial network right now, but the morning of the yen carry trade chaos, woke up, like promptly pissed himself and went on national television to beg for a rate cut, which was like, I thought it was completely humiliating, but whatever. The point, and then had to backtrack a week later. Oh yeah, I didn't really mean it. Oh yeah, yeah. But like the point is like that's how like entitled and comfortable we are with just the market only going up. And people need to remember that markets, free markets at least, don't always go up. And at some point, we can only take on so much excess. We can only stuff so much euphoria down our throats. There's only so many ways to fucking repurpose and repackage shitty, bottom tier debt. At some point, someone has to pay a check somewhere along the line. If I take out a subprime auto loan with a FICO score of 530, and maybe one of these fucking lenders gives it to me, maybe they take it and package up with a bunch of shit and sell it as a security to some other person. And they sell it to some other person. And they sell it to some other person. There's going to be a point where something happens and the attitude on the street changes, where somebody's going to sit in their desk chair one day and go, maybe we don't want to be buying tranches of debt from people with 550 FICO scores. It's not in our best interest because, the market was down 3% yesterday, and let's just see where things settle. And that will happen. It is a mathematical guarantee that will happen at some point. It is a behavioral psychology guarantee that it happens. The only question is when and how fucking messy does it get when it happens?
What are your thoughts on? You got a few more minutes?
Yeah, of course.
What are your thoughts on the sovereign wealth fund that was created on the executive order?
It's great if we fill it up with great stuff, and it's terrible if we fill it up with dog shit. How's that for analysis?
And I'm going to venture to say I have an idea what they're going to fill it with.
If they fill it with crypto, I think that's just a huge risk. I mean, I'm not completely like anti-Bitcoin, but I am anti all this other dog shit out there. And I think crypto, as far as like the tip of like the risk and speculation spear, if you're looking for a weather vane as to like when shit is going to get bad, watch the crypto market, because that crypto is pure risk. There's no product. There's no, but for Bitcoin, if you want to make the argument, okay, maybe Ethereum, smart contracts, whatever. But most of it, the altcoin universe is nothing. It's thin air. It's people speculating just to speculate. It's, it really is like Buffett said, rat poison squared, or whatever he said. There's nothing to it. It's just people moving numbers around. And so if you want to know when people are starting to really deleverage, the way people deleverage is they take off their riskiest investments and their most liquid investments first. And right now, the tip of that spear is the crypto market. So crypto will go, and then stocks will go, and then bonds will go, and then fucking whatever, the auto market will go, and then the housing market. So it starts at the very, very top of like, what's the most liquid and what's the riskiest? Would you rather, if it came down to do or die, you need to pay your rent tomorrow, would you rather sell your Apple stock that pays a dividend and is a share of a cash generating company that's been around for 50 years? Or would you rather sell your fart coin, which you know damn well in the back of your head was created as a joke, means nothing, does nothing, serves no purpose, and for all intents and purposes doesn't exist, yet somehow has $1 billion market cap? You're going to sell the fart coin first. And it goes that way all the way down the deleveraging totem pole. So if you're looking for a canary in the coal mine, watch the crypto market. All we're doing now with like this embrace of crypto, the meme coins, all this other stuff, is we're just, we may still be on the ride up, but eventually the ride will move lower. Crypto will go first, and it could really be a dangerous fool's errand if we over allocate ourselves to crypto. Is there a case for buying Bitcoin to pay off the national debt, which is something I've been hearing, since Trump took office? Can it happen? It actually could theoretically happen. It could be accretive if we put some Bitcoin in a strategic reserve and then the rest of the world buys in after us and kind of game theory like follows our lead, and then the price moves higher. But we don't really know what the market for Bitcoin is being driven by other than legitimate bidders also too, because you have all the stable coins, you have Tether. And so it's dangerous. It could happen. If we buy a million Bitcoin at an average price of 150,000, and then, it becomes valued in, it becomes $5 million a coin valued in US dollars, then yes, then that is an accretive purchase that will allow us to take a chunk out of the debt, assuming we can sell it and then, apply that money to the national debt. So that would be one way to do it. But, I think to really stabilize our footing, something like a commodity basket would also be a great idea for a sovereign wealth fund. Get into the market, buy more gold, buy more silver, buy things with finite supply that can't be like easily replicated or reproduced. And that would be, if I was running the sovereign wealth fund of the country, I'd be in the gold market for sure, because I think at the end of the day, it's whatever central bank holds the most gold that's going to win the game. And Bitcoin is peeking its head up and making an appearance, but at the end of the day, I think gold usurps Bitcoin no matter what right now. Unless we figure out a way to mine an asteroid and we have an unlimited, supply of gold, and then it becomes like, okay, but that's not going to happen, and the supply is never going to be unlimited. So,
Did you
and you
think?
have Bitcoin, which is limited in supply, but can be subdivided, a million times over, but doesn't really isn't an asset. The network's an asset, but the Bitcoin itself isn't an asset. So you have kind of these two things. Hey, what I would do if I was building a sovereign wealth fund and you needed me to just buy sound money, I'd buy, 90% gold, silver, commodity, palladium, a lot of the precious metals, and 10% Bitcoin. If I had to make an allocation, that's what I would do. And then, of course, other financial fixed assets, global bonds, some global equities, whatever else, I know the Swiss National Bank has like all the top like S&P companies in their portfolio and stuff like that.
Did you, when you saw Sunday night that Bitcoin, the futures was falling based upon the tariffs that were put into place over the weekend? Did that make you think at all, like, oh, maybe this is the domino starting to fall, or did you?
I think that every time the market falls and every time crypto falls, but it's never the case. There's always a bidder. Somebody always comes out, here we are, the market's higher than it was then. And so every time we get a hiccup, I think this could be it, and it's never it. So one of these times it will be. If I've learned something about myself, it's that I'm not great at predicting when it's going to happen. So I'm more like a sit back and just kind of watch and, know that personally, I try to stay diversified and allocated in a way where I'm not going to get fucking flattened if that does happen. And that's all you can do other than try to give your honest opinion on podcasts like this and, hope that other people are paying attention. But, look, as somebody that's been bullish gold forever and, uh, that's really, I think gold is really the bread and butter in terms of like wealth preservation. At some point you just got to sit back and say, all right, I'm witnessing a very interesting experiment in, human psychology and a case study for the human race and finance and banking that 100 years from now is going to look very different than it does today when we look back on it. And like the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times. That's what we're doing. So who the fuck knows? Some guy could be fucking committing accounting fraud right now in some high rise tower in San Francisco at a frozen yogurt company. And that could be the thing that fucking crushes the market tomorrow morning. That could be happening right now. You never know. Or it could have happened already. That's the other thing, too. A lot of times companies find fraud or commit fraud or take huge losses or take giant write downs and they wait until the very, very, very last minute to disclose it, because they know as soon as they come out and say we're experiencing some distress, that's it. The market doesn't want to hear the rest. It's fucking sell first, figure out what the fuck's going on later. And so, a lot of times these companies wait until the very, 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 very last minute until it can't be hidden anymore. And so there could be giant holes blown in balance sheets of companies right now that people are showing up every day in suits and going on CNBC and talking about how their earnings report, estimates were for 38 cents a share. We did 39 cents a share or whatever. Meanwhile there's this giant fucking elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. It's fast out fucking taking the debt and moving it off balance sheet at Enron. It's fucking, it's Madoff doing nothing and just not having redemptions enough to the point where he got caught. Like eventually you do get redemptions enough where you get caught. Eventually, like fucking people start asking questions about Enron. Like, so that shit is gonna happen, man. And it could have already happened. We just don't know about it yet. Freaky, right?
It is. Well, and also to it, I know we got to wrap up, but the fragility of the system, and we saw that during COVID, how fragile our society was, right? How people just crumbled right away.
Sure.
I mean, I'll admit, I was buying into it at the beginning, but then you start to see things, you step back and you look at it, you're like, man, this just isn't adding up. Like, none of this is making any sense. But now, a little bit of what you just explained, if that were to happen, which I think it's not even a question of if, it's a matter of when,
Right.
what will our society do? And I think, do I think they'd fall for COVID again? No. But some other type of adversity, something like
They
this,
would.
I think
Listen,
they'd crumble.
people are not equipped to think critically and they're not equipped for discomfort. And that's just the way it is in this country. Like COVID was, I was freaking out when nobody was paying attention. And then when data started to come in from South Korea and Italy and it showed like, this thing's probably not Ebola, I started to calm down right at the time that everybody was fist fighting over fucking toilet paper in the middle of Costco. And so like, we are not great with discomfort and we're not great with, it's herd mentality, right? So that's why people say you want to be a contrarian if you want to invest. If I'm looking to go long, show me the fucking like worst performers so far this year. I was just talking to my friend the other day. I'm going to invest in his fund, because I want exposure to the market and I don't want to fucking deal with it. So I'm finding, places to put my money where I don't have to think about it. But he was down like 30 something percent last year, and I'm like, yeah, that's the guy I want to go with because I know he's smart. I like what he has to say. I think he's right. And I just think the market, he's just got the timing wrong. And so those are the areas that I look in, whereas most people will look at a fucking sheet of fund performers and say, oh, this guy was up, 70% last year. That's the guy I want to go with. He's been riding this fucking wave up. What's going to happen on the way down? He's the one that's going to, take it in the ass the hardest. And so, you do kind of have to be a contrarian in life and especially with markets. You just have to think critically for yourself. And that's it. And you have to have the balls and the gusto to stand by your decision when everybody else tells you it's the wrong thing to do. And just go back to the vegan fucking carnivore thing for a second. Like I've read so much fucking literature on plant-based versus fucking carnivore, right? And you look at a discussion out there in the world and there's this big like, oh, it's a wash, right? Like people can get thin eating carnivore, people can get thin eating plant-based, it's kind of a wash. Well, according to the research I've done, it's not. You know what I mean? And I'm not telling anybody what to do, but for me personally, the information I've been able to ascertain as it relates to, blood work, as it relates to fucking heart disease, as it relates to all these different things. For me, the decision is to go plant based. I know I'm gonna get a million emails. Oh, my blood works better. I'm sure it is. Hey, if it works for you, do it. But that's not. I don't follow fucking what everybody is doing. I do my research myself, and I fucking make my decision myself, and I live and I die by it. It's like picking stocks. I never turned around once and told somebody once in my fucking 20 years of looking at investments. I never turned around once to somebody who suggested I look at a name and it went down and said to them, what a piece of shit, why'd you give it to me? Because at the end of the day, I'm the one fucking placing the trade, not them. You know what I mean? I never once fucking yelled at a dealer at a blackjack table for fucking for not busting when she's supposed to. Never, not once. Never once fucking yelled at a guy at first base when I was playing at third base who hit when he should have stood, or vice versa, Because at the end of the day, I'm at the table. I understand the risk of playing with players who may be novices. I choose to put my money up, and that's that. And so, that's the way that I make my decisions. I do my research, which is generally, I think, comprehensive. I don't think I'm the smartest guy in the world, but I don't think I'm the dumbest. And I make my decisions and I stick by it. And that's what people should do. So like in December 2019, for example, when Fox News started running at the bottom of the screen, coronavirus cases in China are up to 500, are up to 1,100, are up to 2,100. Nobody was talking about it on the news. Nobody had heard of it. No one had a clue. There was definitely no panic. It was business as fucking usual. And all I could think was I come to the same place every day that's got Fox News on. Every day I see that scroller go by. Every day the number goes up a little bit. And all I see are the holidays coming up, people flying back and forth to China, and whatever's going on over there is going to make its way over here and probably already is here. And then I go out and I post, hey, here's my pandemic preparedness list. I'm getting this, this, and this. I went to fucking Aldi. I bought a case of hand sanitizer. I bought the Tyvek suits, the masks, the whole thing. Not because I'm some fanatical fucking maniac, but because we had no idea what it was. We didn't know anything about it. It could have been Ebola. It could have been fucking whatever. I stocked up on 6 months worth of shit. I called some other like-minded people who are, just as paranoid as I am. We talked about it. I got my parents situated. And then there were like 3 weeks where I sat back and everybody said, I'm a fearmonger. I'm this, I'm that. I'm out of my mind. I'm too prepared. Whatever, this, that. I had a guy fucking email me, oh, my wife works at Queens University Hospital, whatever. She wants to know why you're drumming up such panic online. There's no problem here. There's no cases here, whatever. Blah, 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 blah. He's one of the only like random people out of nowhere that actually called. I was like, listen, dude, just fucking calm down. You know what I mean? Like, don't read my Twitter if it's upsetting you this much. But like for 3 weeks, I sat back and endured that. And everybody looked at me like I was crazy. Called my parents. I said, go out and get this stuff and don't fucking argue with me. I gave them the business, which I never do. Okay. And they did it. And then all of a sudden, we fucking woke up one day and shit was different. All of a sudden, we got Trump. Oh, yeah, well, we got 30 cases and they're going to zero. Yeah, I don't think so, buddy. And then a week after that, we had fucking a counter on CNN, too. And a week after that, they were updating it live. And a week after that, the stock market was down 5%. And then it was down 10% the next week. And then all of a sudden, it was a full-blown panic. And as the world was fucking going into full-blown panic, I'm sitting there with a house full of fucking supplies thinking, I don't think this is going to be as bad as everybody thinks it is, So the point is not that I'm some fucking genius because I get, 9 things wrong for every one thing I get right. But like, the point is that you have to think for yourself and you have to make your own decisions. If you follow the herd, you're going to be in deep shit when the shit really hits the fan. And that's not just in the stock market. That's in life in general too.
And that's where I think, we're really going to have a mess on our hands because what you and I have just spoken about on the financial side, society won't be able to handle it. They won't be able to handle if their home values like 2008 drop again. And then you're going to have all that fear mongering. You didn't have the apps. You didn't have Twitter back in 2008 to be able to spread information and scare people like you do today, like they did during COVID. And I think our society will completely crumble worse than, I mean, the same, if not worse than 2020.
We will see an ugly point in time that makes 2008 look like a fucking fairy tale in, a kid's book. The only question is when and how's it going to happen? But it's destined to happen because the bubble's bigger and the people are more accustomed to being comfortable. And that is a pretty noxious brew. We have elected leaders on both sides of the aisle that are reactionary. They react. They're not proactive, they're reactive. Which means by the time it happens, you're already behind the eight ball. It's like medicine. It's the difference between functional medicine or getting something and treating the symptoms, right? Like you can, if you're pre-diabetic, you can either exercise more and change your diet significantly and try to arrest the diabetes, or you can continue what you're doing until you become a full-blown diabetic and then treat, the insulin problem. You can either be prescribed medicine to try to fucking alleviate the symptoms of something that's happening, which is, reactive, or you can try to make sure that your body is in the best shape possible. And so you can be proactive in preventing those things, preventative care. And there's just the two differences between proactive and reactive, and I like to be proactive as much as I can. Look, there's always going to be shit that we can't handle. My filling falls out. I got to go to the dentist. There's no proactive fucking solution for that. But, as it relates to everything that I can have some semblance of control over, that I can prepare for, I try to do that. And it's even so much as like, I take cold showers. Why? It seems stupid. It doesn't like, before the whole cold plunge thing was like popular. I was taking cold showers because like, I like the knowing that I can be comfortable being uncomfortable. Now, I'm not fucking David Goggins navigating like 6 Navy SEAL hell weeks. I would crumble like a fucking bitch trying to do that. But I think like, if it comes down to fucking me or the guy next door and there's one fucking meal left to feed our family with, and it's in between the two of us, and who's gonna get to it, and who's gonna fucking be the man that gets it. I think I want to know that I've done more than the average person to be that guy to make that happen. And I think about this all the time. Like when I'm running or when I'm doing shit that I don't want to do, at some point it's gonna be me and the guy across the mat, and it's going to be who prepared more and who wanted it more. And I'm not some fucking professional anything. I'm a hobbyist. I go to fucking dorky little like regional jiu-jitsu tournaments, and I run 5Ks and 5 milers with like people that are running their first race ever. you know but I know that my performance is going to be predicated on how I prepare and how comfortable I can be with discomfort versus somebody else. And if we're both running a hill on the last mile, like Goggin says, where the fuck do I have to go in my head to make sure that my legs don't stop moving? Because stopping is not an option. It doesn't even show up on the fucking, I have to get to where I'm going. And I am not going to let this person pass me or whatever it is, right? Like somebody's got me in side control. It's like I have 2 minutes. I got to get out and I got to get a submission because I'm down on points and there's no other option. So I have to act here and I have to act now. Just and that comes out of, hey, how much did you prepare for it? Same thing with fucking the market, right? Market fucking shits 20% tomorrow in an unprecedented gap down morning, the likes of which we've never seen before due to some unforeseen geopolitical conflict. Who's going to be hedged and who's going to be 150% over levered long? They're going to get fucking destroyed. And somebody that's got a hedge on is going to navigate the waters a little bit easier. So you can pick whichever one you want to do. You want to allocate, 500% of what you're worth to fart coin, that's your prerogative. But like, you're going to be feeling the pain. So I don't mind people jabbing at me now because I know at those points I'll probably be better prepared. One of the craziest things I've seen with the advent of uh, cryptocurrency is people writing things like it's a risk not to own it. I've seen people say like it's a risk to not own Bitcoin, and that kind of talk is dangerous because ostensibly, say I'm sitting there and you know sound assets that I'm happy with, or I own my house or whatever, to say that it's a risk to not take a risk, which is a very speculative risk, it shows that we have the magnetic poles of our thinking reversed. And going back to my example before about people who would invest in a fund and say, all right, well, this guy was up 70% over the last X amount of years, so I want to go with him. Where I'm over here saying, this guy ate shit last year, but like I like what I thought critically about his investing methods and what his outlook is on the economy, and I think he makes more sense. Um, it's the reason that every piece of financial literature you've ever seen in your life has the words past performance is not indicative of future results on the bottom of it, because you're not trying to predict what the best fund manager in the world did over the last 5 years. You're trying to predict what's going to happen the next 5 years ahead. So you got to skate to fucking where the puck is going, not back behind your own fucking blue line.
Have you ever considered, moving out of a city, moving into a more rural area, or even
Yes.
life outside the United States, moving abroad?
Yeah, I've considered moving abroad, but it's hang on, I dropped something that's going to bother me because if I don't pick it up, I I know it's gonna fucking bother me. Okay, sorry. Um, yes, have I considered it? Yes, I have. And have I considered moving somewhere rural? Yes, I have. And so at some point I will probably do that because that sounds like where I want to be. I want to be shacked up with some big ass German shepherds and my guns and my gold and a fireplace, and then spend my remaining years, somewhere secure and off the grid and off the map. That's the end goal.
In the United States, or would you go abroad?
Well, it's difficult to move abroad. There's a lot of fucking red tape with moving. You can't just pick up and move abroad. I think the cheapest way to like get a passport, like if you want to go to the EU, is you need like at least 300 grand to get one through, I think, Malta or something. Like, I mean, it's a huge fucking undertaking. So there's rural places in the US for sure where you can, get away from everything.
Yeah, I always loved Pennsylvania, man. A lot of small towns, a lot of. It's a great state. My friends in Ohio make fun of me. I'm like, I don't know. I just used to go to Hershey when I was a kid. I mean, I lived in State
Central PA is
College.
wonderful.
Yeah, I lived in Penn State for 2 years. I went back there 2.5 years ago with the idea of like, if I like it, maybe I'll think to move back this way. And then I went downtown, like where the college is, into the businesses, and they had all the pride stuff, and I'm like, I can't do this. Like, I can't do the.
Well, state taxes are low in PA, which is great. And there's a whole like middle of the state that uh, is just woods. And if you go to the southern central part of the state, you get the top of like the Appalachian Mountains. There's some beautiful, beautiful places to live in Pennsylvania that are off the grid. So yeah, might even wind up staying in Pennsylvania, but who knows? For right now, my family's in this area, so I want to stay close to them, and that's really the very top of the priority list.
Where can people find you?
My Substack is called QTR's Fringe Finance. So it's Quoth the Raven. QTR stands for Quoth the Raven, which is my little online handle I've been using for a decade. It's quothetheraven.substack.com. There I am.
People
That's
could
it.
subscribe to it. What do they get for it? People that they're listening to this that have never heard of you before.
Yeah, generally there's I put out between like 5 and 6 posts a week, usually. So it's content that I write. It can be about anything. It can be about politics. It can be about the market, economy, whatever I'm in the mood for. It's generally like a libertarian focused, I would say. So Austrian economics, libertarian focus on government. I do take great care actually to try to post things that I don't agree with also once in a while. Every once in a while, I'll be reading something, from Mises or from, one of my friends that I don't agree with, but I think is a great point and will generate some discussion in the comments. And not to be incendiary, but because I really do believe in looking at the other side of the coin. So I'll post some things like that. That I curate all of the content, and so everything that goes up is stuff that I either find useful, interesting, or comes from friends of mine or people in the industry that I respect immensely. And you'll, like I said, people like Larry Lepard, people like my friend Chris DeMuth, Harris Kupperman, who I love reading his take on things. Anything that I find interesting, and then my organic content as well, whatever I'm in the mood to fucking curse and rant and talk shit about. The tone is somewhat informal, but there's a great group of people that subscribe, and you can get most of the content subscribing for free, so you don't have to you don't have to pay. But I do have like a great group of, and you have to pay to comment, but the only reason I turned that on was because I was getting a lot of spam, and that was the only way to get rid of it. Otherwise, I would leave comments on for everybody. But I do have a great group of like subscribers that you know raise great communications, or raise great commentary about whatever topic of the day it is. There's a little chat room now attached to the Substack where people can go in and just kind of bullshit with each other. I'm in there once in a while. And really, it's just, it's a bunch of people that are somewhat like minded, but I think also to share with me the caution of not wanting to live in an echo chamber because I don't, if I'm long a stock, I want you to bring me the most bearish person you can find on that stock. I need to know the case against it. And if I'm short something, like if I think something's going to go down, find me the best bull. Find me the guy that can give me the best reasons to own this stock. Because it's only when you look at like the best bear case and the best bull case that you can lay all the cards out on the table and then use that critical thinking to try to make an objective decision. And that goes for any issue, whether it's COVID, whether it's the stock market, anything. I want to hear both sides and I want to hear the best arguments that both sides have. Give me the best Democratic talking point and the best Republican talking point, mash them together, and I'll come up with where I want to land. Sometimes it's on the left, sometimes it's on the right, sometimes it's in the middle, sometimes I have no opinion. And so that hopefully is a thread that makes its way out through my Substack, that it really is about having open discussion about the issues. Otherwise, you're not going to arrive at best practices for anything. Investing, yeah, but like you can't find the best practices to tie your fucking shoe unless you talk about it. So
Chris, I appreciate this. Thanks for coming on. And I mean,
sure.
talking to you now for an hour and a half we've been going. I mean, how do you feel about where you're at? And I mean, just you sound great, man. I mean, with everything you've gone through, and
I feel great. Well, I didn't, like I was saying earlier, I didn't. It wasn't like I hit some crazy bottom. I didn't. I wasn't destitute at any point. A lot of the wars I've been fighting have been me versus me. It's been mental. It's been, ask anybody that works out, and people that say discipline is doing things that you don't want to do because you know that you have to. And so I feel great. I feel proud of myself in a way that I haven't for a really long time, which is really profound feeling. Um, I've got some wonderful friends in my life that have given me grace just as friends and have been a wonderful support system. And I'm just I feel very blessed. I have these people that subscribe to my blog that afford me the ability to say something when I want to, not say something when I don't want to, and just feel very comfortable being myself and tapping into exactly how I feel about whatever it is that I want to write about. And, there's those people help support me. I mean, they pay for a subscription to my website and they help me out. And for me, a lot of the writing is cathartic. I joke sometimes in my writing that I should be billing my subscribers hourly because they're listening to me. They're my therapists. And so, as far as how I feel grateful to be alive. I feel blessed. I feel a lot of love. I feel, proud of myself. I feel integrity. Um, and I just feel at a nice spot of peace. And that's it. Grateful would sum it all up, brother.
What an incredible time it is to be alive with these discussions and what you're doing. So I thank you for this, and love to have you back on.
My pleasure. And I'll come back on anytime.
Mic drop.